You're not lazy. You've never been lazy. You have notebooks full of plans you never started. Apps downloaded, set up perfectly, never opened again. A list of things you're going to do that keeps getting longer every year while the things on it stay exactly where they were. You know what you want. You just can't make yourself go get it. That's not laziness. Lazy people don't feel this bad about not working. You sit down to finally do the thing. The important thing, the one you've been circling for 3 weeks. You open it up, and then you spend the next 2 hours doing everything except that. Not because something distracted you, because something in you simply won't go there, and you don't know why. You've never been able to explain it. You just know it keeps happening. Here's what nobody tells you about this. It's not a discipline problem. It's not a motivation problem. It's not that you need a better system, a stricter schedule, a different morning routine, or another YouTube video about atomic habits. None of that is what's happening here. What's actually happening is that you built something a long time ago. A structure, a way of surviving. It worked when you were younger, and now it's running your life, and you can't see it. And every time you try to push through it, it gets stronger. I don't know if this is true for everyone. I want to be careful about that, but I've watched enough people cycle through the same failed systems, the same restarts, the same quiet shame at 11 p.m. on a Sunday, that I stopped thinking of it as a coincidence. There's something underneath, and the productivity industry has been selling you solutions that were never designed for it. Think about the last time you tried to fix this. Maybe you found a new system, watched some videos, bought the journal, set up the calendar blocks. Day 1 was great. Day 3 was okay. Day 8, you quietly stopped and pretended it didn't happen. And then 3 weeks later, you started looking for a better system. That cycle isn't failure. That cycle is the thing working exactly as designed. And that's not even the worst part. The worst part is what that cycle does to how you see yourself over time. You start with ambition, clean and real. And somewhere in the middle of all that restarting, you start building a second story. The story where maybe you're just someone who talks about things and doesn't do them. Where maybe the gap between who you think you are and what you actually do is the truest thing about you. You don't say it out loud, but you think it at 2 a.m. and the thought doesn't surprise you as much as it used to. In this video, I'm going to show you what's actually underneath this, not to make you feel better about it. That's not what this is. I'm going to show you a psychological structure that has been identified and studied for over 100 years that affects somewhere between 15 and 20% of smart, educated people, and that every piece of advice about discipline and habits has been completely ignoring. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And the way you've been talking to yourself about this is going to change, not because it fixes anything, but because you'll finally understand what you've actually been dealing with. You're not broken. You're running old software on a problem it was never designed to solve. And there's a second layer to this that's worse. We'll get there. There are 3 signs that you're living this pattern. Not 2, not 5. 3 specific things that show up together almost every time. And if you recognize all 3, I need you to stay with that feeling instead of explaining it away. The first one is the vision gap. You have an extraordinarily clear picture of who you could be. Not vague, specific. You can see the version of yourself that has the career, the output, the respect, the life. You've imagined it in detail. Multiple times. It feels almost real when you do, but you can't maintain effort toward it for more than a few weeks. The energy at the start is real. It's not fake. It burns out fast and leaves nothing behind except unfinished things and a slightly heavier version of the shame you are already carrying. You might think that means the vision isn't right, that you need to want it more or want something different. That's not what it means. The second sign is the obsession with the perfect system. Somewhere along the way, you decided that the reason you haven't moved is because you haven't found the right framework yet, the right productivity method, the right structure, the right conditions. You believe, with genuine conviction, that once you find the thing that fits, everything will click into place, and you'll finally become the person you already know you can be. This looks like high standards from the outside. It isn't. Perfectionism isn't about caring deeply about quality. Perfectionism is fear wearing the clothes of excellence. If the conditions aren't perfect, you don't start. If you don't start, you can't fail. If you can't fail, the version of you that could be great stays intact, untested, unbroken, still possible. That logic runs completely below the surface. You don't choose it. It just runs. The third sign is the cycle. You know this one already. 1 week you feel it. The momentum, the clarity, the sense that this time is different. You're the protagonist. You can see the whole arc. Then something breaks. You miss a day, or the results don't come fast enough. Or you look at what you've actually produced and it doesn't match what you imagined. And the whole thing collapses. Not slowly. Fast. And what replaces the momentum isn't neutral. It's contempt. The kind that goes quiet and sits in your chest for days. You go from hero to worthless with nothing in between. No gray area. No moderate self-assessment. Just the two extremes. Taking turns. Maybe I'm wrong about how universal this is. I genuinely don't know. But I've never met someone who described all three of these things and wasn't dealing with something much older than a productivity problem. Here's what's actually happening underneath all three of those signs. Psychologists in the mid-20th century started seeing a pattern they couldn't explain with the existing frameworks. Patients who were clearly intelligent, clearly motivated, who could articulate exactly what they wanted and why it mattered, and who completely fell apart when it came time to actually do the work. The common assumption at the time was moral. These people were lazy, weak, undisciplined, but the analysts kept looking because the pattern was too consistent to be a character flaw. What they found was this: these people weren't avoiding work. They were protecting something. Specifically, they were protecting an image of themselves as someone with unlimited potential by never actually testing that potential against reality. Think about the logic of that for a second. If you never fully try, you never fully fail. And if you never fully fail, you never have to find out whether the version of you that you've been protecting all this time is actually real. The ambition stays in the imagination, where it can't be disproven, where it stays perfect, where it stays safe. That's not laziness. That's a survival strategy, and it makes complete sense once you understand where it came from. There's a specific developmental failure that creates this structure, not one single event. A pattern, either the people raising you reflected back an image of you as exceptional, as special, as destined for something, but didn't give you the actual tools to build real capability to match that image. Or they didn't see you at all, didn't reflect back your real inner life, didn't validate what was actually true about you. And so you retreated into an inner world where you could be seen, where you were important, where you mattered. Both paths lead to the same place: a self that never got to build a stable foundation, a self that had to construct a substitute, a glorified image, held together entirely by not being tested. The guy who tells you about his business idea every time you see him but has never actually started it. Not once. You know someone like that. Every detail of the plan is perfect. The plan has been perfect for 3 years. That's not him being careful. That's the structure protecting itself. And here's the thing that makes this so hard to see from the inside. The protection mechanism is indistinguishable from ambition. It feels like caring deeply. It feels like having standards. It feels like being someone who takes their potential seriously. But it's running in the opposite direction. Conscious desire has never been strong enough to override unconscious resistance. Not for anyone. Not ever. That's why discipline fails. That's why visualization makes it worse. Feeding the fantasy instead of the real works. That's why every system eventually stops working. You're not applying the wrong tactics. You're applying tactics to something that tactics can't reach. The productivity industry profits from you not knowing this. Every time you fail and try again, they sell you something new. The cycle of failure is their business model. And the people who actually understand this structure are these clinicians. The depth psychologists, they're expensive, hard to find, and have no financial incentive to compete with a $19 app. So the knowledge stays hidden, and you stay stuck, blaming yourself for something that was built before you were old enough to choose it. You're not running out of discipline. You never had the wrong amount of discipline. You've been solving the wrong problem your entire life. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Everything in part 2 might have felt like relief. Finally, an explanation. Finally, something that makes sense. Finally, a reason that isn't just you're weak. Hold on to that feeling. Because what comes next is the part that actually stings. The explanation doesn't fix anything. Understanding why you're stuck doesn't unstick you. Knowing the name of the structure doesn't dismantle it. And this is where most people take the insight and turn it into a new story about why they can't be expected to do anything yet. That's the structure doing what it always does. Using new information as new protection. So let's be honest about what this actually means for you right now. Every productivity system you've ever tried failed, not because it was the wrong system. It failed because it was designed for a different psychological architecture than the one you're running. Those systems assume that when you break a habit, it's just data, a neutral setback. Adjust and continue. For you, every missed day isn't data, it's evidence. Evidence that the version of yourself you've been protecting might not be real. So your brain doesn't treat failure as information, it treats failure as an existential threat. And it responds accordingly. You don't just stop the habit. You disappear from it completely, and then you hate yourself quietly for a week before starting over with a new system that will fail for exactly the same reason. Think about how many years that cycle has been running. Not months, years. The guy at the office who always talks about what he's working on outside of work, the project, the side thing, The thing that's almost ready, it's been almost ready for 2 years. Everyone knows it. Nobody says it. He doesn't see it. You might be that guy in some version of your own life. Not in the same way. Maybe smaller. Maybe more private. But the pattern is the same. The imagination is more real than the works. And keeping the imagination intact is more important than finding out if the work would actually land. Here's another truth that's harder to say. Visualization makes this worse. Every piece of advice about picturing your success, imagining your future self, feeling the emotions of achieving the goal, that advice was written for people who don't have this structure. For someone with a stable sense of self, visualization creates a gap between current reality and desired future. And that gap generates productive tension. For you, visualization feeds the fantasy. It makes the imagined version of success feel satisfying enough that the actual work feels less urgent. You've probably noticed this. You have a great session thinking about what you're building. You feel energized, motivated, clear. And then you don't do anything for 3 days. That wasn't motivation. That was the structure consuming the energy before it could become action. And mindfulness doesn't automatically fix this either. A lot of people in this situation turn to meditation, to presence, to spiritual practice. And it can genuinely help, but only if it's making the defensive structures more visible, not covering them with more comfortable ideas. Spirituality that doesn't integrate the shadow just makes the ego more sophisticated. It gives you better language for why you're still not doing the thing. The shame cycle gets rebranded as resistance or the journey or not being attached to outcomes. And the structure keeps running, now with a more enlightened vocabulary. That one's gonna bother some people. Good. Here's the hardest truth in all of this. You can't willpower your way out of an unconscious defensive structure. Not because you're weak, because that's not how any of this works. The resistance isn't coming from the part of you that responds to discipline. It's coming from the part that formed before you had language, before you had any choice about any of it. Asking that part to respond to a productivity app is like using a bandage to treat something structural. The bandage isn't wrong. It's just not touching the actual problem. And here's what that has cost you. Not just time. Not just the projects that didn't happen or the goals that reset every January. It's cost you the ability to trust yourself every time you told yourself this time would be different and it wasn't. You made a small withdrawal from the account of your own credibility with yourself. Do that enough times and you stop believing your own intentions. You make plans with a quiet voice in the background that already knows how this ends. You start building smaller, not because your ambition shrank, because you've learned not to invest fully in something you expect to abandon. That's the real damage, not the unfinished projects. The relationship you now have with your own word. The person who has tried 14 different systems in 3 years isn't undisciplined. They're someone who keeps trying to fix a structural problem with behavioral tools. And each failure doesn't just fail. It confirms something. It confirms the thing you were most afraid was true. That maybe the gap between who you think you are and what you actually produce is permanent. It isn't, but you can't close it with another app. The productivity industry will keep selling you new entry points to the same cycle for as long as you let it. Because your repeated failure is not a bug in their business model. It is their business model. Every new system you buy after failing the last one is revenue. Your shame is the engine. Your hope is the product. Nobody in that industry has a financial incentive to tell you that the problem isn't behavioral. So they don't, and you keep paying in money, in time, in the slow erosion of your belief that you're capable of anything at all. The person reading this right now who just thought, but my situation is different. That's the structure talking. It's very good at sounding like you. So where does that leave you? Not with a solution. I'm not going to do that to you. You've had enough solutions. You don't need another one. What you need is to see this thing clearly for the first time. Really clearly. Without the story you've been telling yourself about it. Here's what's actually true. The stagnation you've been calling laziness was never laziness. It was a psychological adaptation. Something a younger version of you built because it was the only tool available at the time. It worked. It kept something intact that needed protecting. The problem isn't that it exists. The problem is that you've been treating it like a character flaw instead of a structure. And you've been applying solutions designed for character flaws. That's the whole mistake. Not weakness, not lack of effort, a category error, applied for years. Think about how differently you'd approach a structural problem versus a moral one. If a building has a cracked foundation, you don't motivate the building. You don't tell it to try harder. You don't install a new app in it. You go to the foundation. You do the slow, unglamorous work of addressing what's actually broken. That's what this requires. Not more discipline. Not a better morning routine. Not another framework from someone who built their entire business on the assumption that your problem is behavioral. The people who actually resolve this pattern, and some do, they don't get there by finding the right system. They get there by doing psychological work that directly addresses the unconscious mechanisms. That means going back to where the structure formed, facing the developmental failures that made it necessary, slowly building a self-image that doesn't require protection from reality. That's not fast. It's not clean. It doesn't make for a good YouTube video about morning routines. And I'm not saying everyone with this pattern needs years of clinical work. I genuinely don't know your specific situation, but I do know this. If you keep approaching a psychological problem as if it's a behavioral one, you will keep getting the same results. Not because you're a lost cause, because you're solving the wrong equation. There's something else worth saying here. If you can't access therapy right now, or you're not ready for it, or you're not sure it applies to you, there's still something you can do that's different from everything you've been doing. Stop fighting the stagnation, not as a strategy, not as a reframe that makes it okay. Just stop treating every moment of paralysis as evidence of your failure as a person. When you sit down to do the thing, and your brain simply won't go there, instead of forcing it, instead of hating yourself, instead of opening a new tab to research better productivity systems, just look at it. What's actually happening in that moment? What does it feel like in your body? What's the thing underneath the paralysis that you're not letting yourself name? You don't have to fix it. You just have to stop running from it. Because here's the thing about unconscious protective structures. What you resist persists. What you actually look at starts to change. Not immediately, not dramatically, but the act of being seen, even just by yourself, weakens the mechanism. The structure only operates at full strength in the dark. This is slow work. It's uncomfortable in a way that has nothing to do with discipline. It asks you to sit with things that your entire psychology has been organized around avoiding. But it's the only direction that actually leads somewhere different. Every other direction leads back to the same room, same shame, same restart, same quiet erosion. Jung wrote that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. You've been calling it laziness. It isn't fate and it isn't laziness. It's a structure you built to survive something, and you can learn to see it. That's not hope. That's just what's true. There's one more piece to this that we haven't touched yet. It has nothing to do with productivity or ambition. It's about what this pattern does to the way other people see you, and why the damage there runs deeper than anything we've covered today. That's the next one.